Postcards from a Dying World, the podcast. For more than a decade, I've reviewed over 1,000 books that are mostly science fiction, horror, and bizarro. This feed will feature bonus audio I have produced over the years, as well as a monthly digest of reviews based on what I've read each month, plus the occasional bonus material about my own fiction. Thanks for listening.
Hey, welcome to Postcards from a Dying World. I have a special guest tonight, and Ryan and Anthony. Just kidding. I have two special guests tonight. The authors of Hissers 3, Fortress of Flesh, here to talk about that book eventually, but we're going to talk about all their stuff. So welcome to Postcards from a Dying World, Ryan and Anthony. Anthony, we are used to talking to each other on podcasts all the time. So, but for anyone who doesn't know, why don't we start with you a little bit? Tell the folks who you are and how you ended up co-writing a book with this dude.
So it turns out if you stalk someone for long enough, they just give in, and then they let you write books for them.
Right. And
that is not an endorsement for stalking. It's a joke.
Now, I should admit to bias here because Ryan I've known for about a decade and a half through San Diego writer community. The first stint I lived here, and then Anthony and I met protesting the Westboro Baptist Church at Comic-Con on behalf of Cthulhu. And, we write stuff together, and we co-host a podcast called Dickheads together. So yeah, these are friends of mine, and I'm really excited to talk about this book. Because I'm really proud of these dudes and what they pulled off with this book. So we'll get into Hissers, but Anthony, you really didn't give us a great introduction about yourself. How did you get into horror, and how did you get into writing? Yeah, I just pulled shit. I just called you out on that.
How did I get in your house? I hopped the fence again. So how I got into writing, I've been writing pretty much my entire life, and it all started with a little book called Everville because I accidentally read that before I read The Great and Secret Show. And then I moved on to the Books of Blood, and I've kind of never looked back when it comes to reading and writing. And I mean, I guess you could say primarily horror, but I also love sci-fi, crime, and what more hoity-toity people would call literature. And then so I met David, like you said, protesting the Westboro Baptist Church at Comic-Con. And then a year later, my first Bizarro novella, King Space Void, came out on Erase Red Press's new Bizarro author series. I've sold a bunch of short stories since then, had a comic out, have a future comic out, coming out, hopefully in the next year that I'm pretty excited about, which is an ecological horror comic. And yeah, so it's kind of a generic origin story, but it's kind of it. I just write, and that's the only thing that's ever really stuck for me is writing.
Right. Well, and we'll get more into your process and what you brought to this eventually. But Ryan, tell the folks who you are, how you got into horror, and some early career stuff.
All right. Well, I'm Ryan C. Thomas, and I think I just grew up reading horror, and I went to school, got a degree in communications, and got my minor in comparative literature. Took off to the big city, New York, got a job at a magazine, and did that for a number of years before moving to San Diego. Got a job at a different magazine as a staff writer, and that whole time just, I always tell this. I've told it 1,000 times, but I'll tell it again for your audience. When I was young, I would go to daycare every day after school from about second grade to sixth grade. And it was at a friend.
I was going to bring this up because
okay,
it's a great part of your story.
Yeah, I was at a friend's house, and his mom was just insane. She was awesome and wonderful, but every day after school, she would sit us down in front of a horror movie, whether it was, Friday the 13th Part 2 or Nightmare on Elm Street or like Chud or one of those more indie-centric type films for years. And we would just watch horror films. And I was like 8, 9 years old. And this was my daycare upbringing. So I just got really into it. So, I missed that woman. She was so awesome. And so cut to now I'm working at the magazine in San Diego. And I finally, at that point, said, I've been reading it, I've been watching it. I'm such a huge fan. I guess I should give it, I should try writing something. And I've probably told this story on other podcasts, but I'll tell it again, is I worked at that job for years. In the first year, I was told to write articles on like women's shoes and stuff that stuff that I shouldn't really have been writing about, had no knowledge of. And to sort of like kind of get my creative juices flowing, I would take some time in between articles and write a short story. And then that short story got longer and longer and longer and longer until it became The Summer I Died. And then when my boss found it, she fired me. I don't know if I ever told that.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, she fired me. She said, we didn't hire you to write, books. We hired you to write articles. And I had to say, well, in between articles, sometimes I got to like get the juices going.
Right.
And she rehired me. She hired me back after I explained. And she actually liked the book. I gave her the book when it was out. She's like, oh, it's a good book. And so that was an interesting story. But that's how my first novel got written was, all right, I got to write this article on women's shoes. And then I got to write an article on like a new pet store or something. And I've got 15 minutes to rearrange my brain. And so let me just work on this crazy story I started with these two characters.
Right, and The Summer I Died is for a debut novel. It's a really great shot across the bow, and as far as if people have not read that one, I think it's a really great place to start with your work. Not just because it's your first work, but because it has a kind of it has that first album or that first demo raw energy in a really great way. Not to say that I don't like your other work, but what I think that raw energy of that first, that first demo feel of it is one of the things that gives that book just that book is very like heartbreaking and hard to read in certain moments. Almost on a Girl Next Door Jack Ketchum kind of level. Like
it ends up on a lot of lists with the Girl Next Door.
Yeah, because it has it's very kind of brutal. So I think it would be fair to compare it to, for new readers, it would be fair to compare it to something like a Wolf Creek or a High Tension, similar type of kind of.
I think that's fair.
Yes, type of thing. But what's really cool about what you were talking about as far as your background and how you watched all these B movies is one of the things that I think gives your work a real special feel to it, Ryan, is that like you kind of always have that B movie sensibility like hanging around, and your English training means that there's a balance between like really excellent writing and just and kind of B movie energy, which is especially apparent in Hissers, but we'll get to that. Right. So that's one of the things I like about The Summer I Died. So from there, you wrote sequels to The Summer I Died, and it was a success. But like, what was the reaction to that first book when it came out? Because you kept writing, right?
Yeah. Well, the very first, I think, 2 or 3 reviews that it got were horrible. They hated it. One star across the board. And I had that moment of doubt of, well, I guess I'm done. I gave it a shot. And then it took about another month or 2, and I started getting a lot of praise for it. A lot of 5-star reviews came in. A lot of people started to email me. And it kind of just, that snowball kept rolling down bigger and bigger. Thankfully, more people really, really liked it than hated it. And, now 15, 16 years later, yeah, it gets heaps of praise, which I'm hugely, So I went from being really upset and feeling like, well, I can't do this, to suddenly, oh, maybe I can do this.
Right. Well, and people wanted more. They wanted more of Roger and stories with this character who didn't really seem set up for a sequel. So that was probably a bit of a challenge, I'm sure.
It was, because in that first book to be a standalone book, but two things kind of happened was, I started getting emails for sequels. When are you going to write a sequel? When are you going to, and then also I enjoyed his character. And so I wanted to revisit him. And there is a sort of a theme in the first book that kind of gets missed a little bit, I think, sometimes in the reviews, which is the whole, I'm a huge comic book superhero nerd. And there's so much about his character that sort of has that theme is sort of in there. And so I wanted to explore it in the sequels a little bit, turning it into like, an actual superhero story, but it's got this sense of like hate to it, if that makes sense.
No, it totally does. And I think that is one of the kind of the B sensibilities too that you bring to things, is that you bring a little bit of the serious comic book reader into a lot of the work, which is really cool. One of the other things about your background that a lot of people, maybe even some of your readers, don't necessarily know is your background in music. There's a lot of there's a lot of punk rockers who write horror, and there's a lot of metal dudes here and there, but I know Cody has specifically pointed out that there's very few guys who can play the type of music that you do, and strut backwards on a bar with their guitar, and has played the kind of music that you do. You actually you were in a band for many years here in San Diego called the Buzz Bombs. It was like kind of punkabilly, great stuff. But you also like toured with a pretty well-known band. This is a really cool part of your background. How did you get into music, and where did that part of your journey come in?
Yeah, I started playing in bands in high school and really getting into guitar. And so when I got to college, I started a band, and that the first band I toured with, we just did the thing where you get in the van and you tour, you just drive. You're like calling clubs on the road, like, hey, we're going to Aberdeen in 2 days. Where can we play? We did that thing. Mm-hmm. And it really just kind of like made me a better musician, made me a person. I got voted class introvert when I was in school. And all of that touring and being on stage got me to the point now where like you can't shut me up. So that was really good.
Oh, that's how that happened, huh?
but honing my craft over the years, until I got to San Diego and just found two really great guys that were excellent musicians, and we did that for years. And then I got hooked up with the other band because we used to open for them.
Mm-hmm. And that's cashed out. And that's important for this book. We'll come back to that when we get into Hissers, because I think you brought something really special to this book in tiny ways in that. But yeah, and you did the music for a long time here, and I've got a chance to see the Buzz Bombs play a couple times, and even though it's not really my style of music, I was very, very, very impressed with your playing ability and your ability to put on a show. And I think that ability actually translates to writing in lots of ways, because I think that you get to understand sometimes like a little bit about the face-to-face of working an audience can sometimes help when you're thinking about like delivery of dialogue for that matter.
Yeah. Well, it's very, the song, you just want to get kind of to the point in the heart of the melody. There are a lot of guitar players out there who can write really crazy, intricate songs with all these nuances and changes. And Metallica is an example. Some of their earlier stuff kind of all over the place, and that stuff works for them, and that's awesome. But at the end of the day, you just want a song to be good and tight and together. And I try to apply that to my writing as much as.
Right. And we'll get back to talking about dialogue, because we both are big fans of, we both have a similar book that we look to for dialogue guidance in Fletch. And I'm
Gregory McDonald. Gregory McDonald's so good.
Yeah. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. Anthony, how did you when did you first read Ryan's work, and when did you was it? I mean, you read Ryan's work before you actually met Ryan as a person, right?
Yeah, so I read The Summer I Died. God, probably when did it come out? 2006. So I probably read The Summer I Died in 2008. I think I was just doing a search for more, because I was in my late teens, early 20s. So I was like, look for the extreme stuff.
Uh-oh.
And it stood out to me, and has always stood out to me about Ryan's work, is that his economy of prose, his lean style, I absolutely have ripped off for my own writing over the last decade. And then, so yeah, I picked up The Summer I Died, and then I read the Monsters anthology that he edited, right?
Mm-hmm.
Monsters.
Yeah. And then
I have
I
that
can't
right here.
remember.
Monstrous.
And so, yeah, I just started reading that. Then I read Ratings Game. I became a fan. I just started.
You're
as a
one
fan.
of 10 people.
Ratings Game.
Yeah.
Well, the other person's here.
Yeah.
And I didn't really think of it, but if you had told me then that we'd be doing this now, I'd be like, you're crazy. Talented people don't.
Ratings Game is ahead of the ball game because a certain movie, Nightcrawler, came out a couple years ago that had it wasn't exactly the same, but it was.
I got a couple phone calls from the other 10 people that read the book. I got a couple phone calls going, dude, did they read your book? They stole your story. And I'm like, out Jake Gyllenhaal.
Yeah. It's a little similar, but yeah. But so Anthony, like, yeah, you did. So you read Ryan a couple times before you met him, and so just like everything. I mean, like I know this from being. We all meet a lot of the authors we read, being a part of this community, and it's not like a starstruck thing because like we're used to it and we're used to people being in the community, but we had an opportunity with Ryan and Cody and different people because we live in this city to get to know some of these writers like more so than just seeing them at cons. And so you
say we don't get starstruck, but you got to remember that when Ryan, I hadn't had anything published. I was just a guy who was going to school for an English degree and who also loved reading, obviously writing, but I never thought I could do this seriously, at least until like 5 or 6 years later. Ryan and I have actually known each other for a while.
Right, right.
My first writing job.
Yeah. Yeah.
Copyright.
Oh, did you come into eCopywriters?
No, dude, I did.
I forgot I worked at that.
So when I met Ryan.
Hey, hold on a second, guys. Anthony.
So Ryan actually gave me my first copywriting job at Yale eCopywriters.
eCopywriters.
But but that was still not the first time I met Ryan. I met Ryan at a signing for Cody Goodfellow's Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars, who I had met on Brian Keene's old message board forum. And Cody was posting that he was going to be doing a signing. And I don't know, I probably mentioned something about, I really like The Summer I Died too. And he said, Ryan will probably show up if you want to bring that book for him to sign. And turns out he showed up.
Yeah.
This is at the old Miss Galaxy location.
Old like 3 locations ago. Yeah. All right. And Ryan and we met before Summer I Died even probably came out. It was, I think, a year before that. So
it might have been, yeah.
Yeah. And we used to have here in San Diego for a little while, we were doing these prose potlucks with a couple writers, including Cody's uncle's house, which was which was an experience, but very, very cool. And then
Wait, so how did you guys meet? Well,
I think it was
through somebody
Cody.
roast potluck. Was it Cody that set it up?
Yeah, Cody set it up, and then the first time I think Ryan and I ever hung out was basically gawking at all of Cody's books. That room
Yeah.
that he had that was all paperbacks.
Yeah, it was one big wall of book. I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, and we would just sit there and stare at it and be like, "Oh my God, look at that! Look at that!" And
Really? That
yeah,
was cool. That
yeah,
wall was cool, I should say.
yeah. And what we used to do back at those events, and we had one at my house, and we had a couple of them, is we would just hang out and read stories for each other, and then give each other feedback. So we'd read short stories, and I remember very distinctly. I read a story, Shoe, that's in my collection, Screams from a Dying World, which, by the way, lost to Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars in the Wonderland. But Cody eviscerated that story in the Pros Potluck and made it so much better because I got lots of really good advice, from that.
There's one story I've never, because I read it at Pros Potluck and Cody, and so I just never even went back and fixed it because I was like, I can't now, I can't, and I never published it.
Right, right. Well, there sometimes
He's been
stories.
good this whole time.
Yeah, but Cody was already had 2 books out, so he was definitely the most forward or advanced of those of us that were there at the time. So, but yeah, that's how Ryan and I met. I don't know how you and Cody met, but I know, yeah, I know Cody put us together as far as like those. He'd say, "Yeah, I know people to invite," and he'd invite a couple people, and then I brought Paul Stewart, for example, and who's in Monstrous, and so yeah, it was a fun time. It was a cool time in San Diego. So, but anyways, so Ryan, you did a couple sequels and to Summer I Died, but Hissers is where you got to really let your monster flag fly, and this trilogy, for people who don't know, and we're going to talk a lot about part 3 because that's the one that you just put out, but how did Hissers start? Like, what's the origin story for Hissers? It seems like what you wanted to do was something bold and new with zombies.
Yeah. Well, this was when Permuted was first blowing up, back when Jacob owned the company.
Mm.
He had published a couple of my short stories, and he sent me an email and he said, "Hey man, what about a novel?" And back in the day, Permuted was almost exclusively zombie stuff. And I said, "Well, sure, because Permuted's blowing up. Let me get on the roster here." But I've never really been like a huge fan of just forward zombie novel. I mean, I like some, don't take that the wrong way, but it's not my first thing. So I said, if I'm gonna do a zombie novel, it's gonna be different, and it's gotta be something I would want to read or see on a movie screen. And so I really just went to a place of what do I like, and how can I like mash that up kind of into a zombie novel. And it really came down to, I'm a huge monster movie fan. Like I love movies like The Thing or Cloverfield or something with a monster. And I also like kids on bikes type stuff. And so that was sort of the origin of it, was like, how do I mix those two things into what would be classified as a zombie novel.
Right, and I think the coming of age part and the kid part of it is one of the things that's underrated about the first book. And I think one of the things, when I look back at my review of it, because I read it when it came out like a long time ago, or I read it several years ago. Anyways, I'm not sure if I read it exactly when it came out, but I read it several years ago. And one of the things that I pointed out, and one of the things that I really remember strongly about the first Hissers, is that there's a scene where they have to hide in the high school, which they're all dreading going to, because this is the summer before you know, these are middle school kids. These are really young kids. And like the whole dreading of the high school that they're going to is kind of one of the parts that's really cool in Hissers that, yeah, sure, people are going to talk about the monster zombies and that stuff, but, and that's where that's where I'm thinking about how you're balancing the B stuff with you know, really great character work. So, you know, talk to us a little bit about writing that, those kids, because they're a really good part of that first book.
Yeah. You know, a lot of those kids are an amalgam of kids I grew up with. And you know, they were the kids I hang out at the bus stop with, they were the kids I played soccer with, they were the kids I biked with in my neighborhood. And I took all the parts of those, you know, friends I had growing up and kind of, you know, took part A, B, and part C and put them all together into one kid. So, you know, all of those people were friends of mine in one way or another, even if it was just like a part of a character was a friend of mine, if that makes sense. You know, we would, you know, when I was, you know, because I'm old now, so when I was growing up, like it wasn't uncommon for like a 13-year-old girl to be walking around the neighborhood smoking. That doesn't happen these days, you know, that's long gone. But that type of like, there were girls in my neighborhood growing up who were that age that would just be smoking, and they were like too cool to talk to. Then when you finally did talk to them, you found out like, oh, she's pretty deep. There's a lot going on with this person, and you know that's part of Amanita's character. You know,
And I should note that you grew up in Rhode Island, because I know if I was listening to an interview, I'd want to know exactly where you grew up.
outside of Providence, as they say, about 10 minutes from Providence.
Yeah.
In a little town called Buttonwoods.
Mm-hmm. But so for Hissers too, so this was part of the whole Permuted line, and for anyone who was not a part of the horror community, Permuted was very popular for a short period of time, and then kind of imploded when I think it changed hands,
Yeah.
ownership, that kind of thing.
Don't get me going.
Yeah, I know. But this is important to the story, I think, because you did a sequel. Was that before or after was that for Permuted too?
That was for Permuted, and it was I had a verbal contract with the previous owner of Permuted, and he sold the company right as I finished the book. And you know, I won't get into the gossip of it all, but we were informed that it had changed hands. I emailed the new owner and said, "Oh, well, the book is done, part 2 that I was asked to write, and here's the email outlining the deal." I just, you know, had never really actually gotten the contract, and so I was like, "Can I get the contract?" And they said no. Well, they said, you know, anyone who followed the Permuted, you know, kerfuffle of that time will stop doing print editions and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, at that point, I just said, well, you know, my own little thing going on, I'll do it myself. But it was written because they had asked for the sequel, you know. And again,
right.
Samurai died. I really liked these characters, you know. I really wanted to see where they were going to go.
Right. And for you, the motivation in doing the sequels is more to see what happens to the characters, or did you always have like kind of a trilogy in mind when you started conceiving of the story, or was it just, or were you motivated by like, now I want to know what happens to these characters?
Yeah, I was definitely motivated by what happens to the characters. By the time I got through the second book, I said, well, I don't want this to be The Walking Dead. I don't want it to go on and on and on. I want it to end so I can do other things, but I want to see it end. So I knew there was going to be a third book. You know, I just had to get
there. Right, and we'll get to how things changed for the third one. Anthony, what was your history in reading Hissers? Like, I know you read it. You read them before you got the gig to do part 3 with Ryan. So, what was your history?
Yeah, I read them both. I was working in downtown San Diego, so they were definitely 2 of my to and from work on the trolley books, which is a thing I sorely miss. Hissers 1, I thought it was all right. I'm not.
It was okay. Yeah.
I'm not a huge zombie guy, but what really makes it work for me is Ryan's. It's hold on, I'm getting this look. What I really enjoy is Ryan's writing style. So
Right.
it's like I said, it's funny, it's lean. I feel immersed in it. I wouldn't even I don't think I've ever seen you be wordy. You've been deep, but you've never been so wordy that I'm like, just get to the fucking point.
Well, that goes back to Fletch, and we'll get to that.
Right.
But it's
Well, it's funny, Anthony, that you've picked it because since we also work together on things, that's one of the things that, for example, when I was working with Deadeye, Jeff Burke would always say that I don't waste words, that I don't waste time. That's something that I also appreciate about Ryan's work, and it's kind of funny that that's something that we both get accused of is not wasting words and not messing around. But I think that comes with Ryan and I have a lot of similar influences on that. But that
well,
means
I think what's important to note with Ryan's writing is that I think being an editor also helps him be a better writer.
Mm-hmm.
So he knows what needs to go and what actually needs to stay.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, not to cut you off, but that's another thing I did.
Why you do it all the time?
Do it again. When I was working on the magazine, though, yeah, you have to make word count for an article. So I would edit people's stuff down. I got really good at going, this word doesn't need to be here to make the article make sense.
But real quick, while we're on the topic of the first two Hissers books, I just want to say that Ryan historically doesn't like part 2, and I think part is the best of the trilogy.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Well, and we'll get to final thoughts on those things in a little bit because we want to give people a chance to listen to this before we get into spoilers. But yeah, and one of the other things too about Hissers is that it has kind of a body horror. It takes the zombie thing and kind of throws it in the mix with body horror, with how the zombies evolve. And where did that come from with you, Ryan? Was that just an aha moment, like when you were?
It kind of was an aha moment. Well, when I was trying to figure out what the story was going to be and how to make it different,
Mm-hmm.
I remember how it came to me, but I had this moment of like, oh, well, what if they can attach things to themselves and become monsters? Because again, I really wanted it to be as much of a monster book as a zombie book.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to figure out how to make that work. At some point it just came to me like, oh, this would be cool if they could just stick an arm on their chest.
Yeah.
And then kind of trying to come up with a very B-movie type way that could happen. So with the drug, whatever that they're trying to invent for soldiers to reattach limbs that get blown off.
Right. Which is kind of comes up in a really cool moment in Hissers 3 that we'll probably talk about at some point. It's one of my dog-eared pages. But I think one of the cool things about the setting too is that, and Anthony and I have talked about this, is that the parts outside of the cities of Southern California is a underutilized location for horror. And it's something that we've talked about many times. So talk about this fictional place that the first two books kind of start off in, and then we'll talk a little bit about San Diego, because San Diego is a character in Hissers 3. So
so Castor is the name of the town, and it's really just based on different towns I knew growing up in New England, different towns I knew touring when I was in college or right after college, playing in these small towns, these small college towns where, they've got a pizza place and a bowling alley and a gas station, and that's it, and you're playing in the bowling alley tonight. And so it's just those tiny small towns where there's not much going on, and the kids have to ride their bikes and try to make their own fun. It's just an amalgam of all those places, I think in my head, I see these small towns in it's a mixture of these small towns in New England and these small towns in Colorado that I used to gig in. So in my head, it's like I took those two and kind of like worked them together and created a fictional town of Castor.
Yeah, and I think it works really well for, and it's a bit of a spoiler for the end of book 2, but you know, rough times come to Castor. uh, and look, we're gonna sell this as, I really think people should read the whole trilogy, but I think in many ways, because I read the other books so long ago, and I read 3. I almost read 3 as a standalone, kind of in a way, because I started to remember things as I was reading, but in a lot of ways it stands really well on its own, in my opinion. Like you definitely will benefit from reading all 3. So, but yeah, but so what happened here with Hissers 3, Ryan, is that like a lot of collaborations, it came together partially because just like the one we're currently reading for Dickheads, where one author started it and felt like they really needed some help finishing it, which is natural sometimes. But you came to Anthony with this, right? Like I would like someone else to jump in on this with me. And how did that happen?
Well, I don't think Ryan me so much as I came to him about it. In all honesty, Ryan would come to our other podcast that we do, and I would always ask him, "Hey, when are we going to get another Roger book?" Because I love those books. Ryan has done with the Roger Huntington series is far and away better than what most people do with their book series. And he was talking a little bit earlier about how Roger is kind of like a low-key superhero. And when it clicked with me, somewhere I think early in book 3 that's what he was doing, I thought it was brilliant. And sure, they're the horror people who don't like the second and third book because it's certainly not as gory and like brutal as I Died, but they're extremely well written. They're funny. And I mean, there's some pretty brutal stuff in both of those books. But Ryan's ability to make look different and grow the character at the same time in that series is incredible. And so I kept asking him, "Hey, when are you gonna write me that fourth Roger Huntington?" And what was your answer?
My answer was I can't do it until I finish Hissers 3 because I'm kind of a completist and I kind of only work on one book at a time. So I knew
you'd started Hissers 3, but you hadn't.
I had done a full complete draft. It was a full complete 3, but I didn't like it. And having 2 kids now, and I'm a stay-at-home dad. It's hard to find the time to go back and fix it and find out what's wrong with it.
I didn't know you had a completed draft. I thought you'd started it. Yeah.
No, I had a completed draft, and I said, "There's a lot wrong with this, and I just don't have time to fix it." And then Anthony kind of offered. He's like, "Let me look at it. And I said, "Yeah, great."
Well, he's being a lot nicer about that. I was drunk, and I said, "Just let me do it for you."
That might have been what happened.
Just let me fix it. I'll do it.
I'll finish it.
I said, "I'll finish it, and we'll do it." And I didn't think he'd say yes, because I mean, I'm not trying to just jump in on Ryan's series and be like, "It's your book, man." But I was tired of waiting for Roger 4. So, and I'm tired of him complaining. Well,
but I know that you get it. We see eye to eye on most things when it's in most movies.
Oh, here we go. You recommend one bad movie to this guy. He never lets it go.
It wasn't a tip. It was anyway. And I had read his writing, and I was like, "Oh, he's a good writer. You can." And so I knew, and you had read the series, the first 2. Yeah. So I was like, "I trust this guy."
Yeah.
So I gave him the manuscript, and I said, "Fix this," and he did.
Well, before that, I went back and reread books 1 and 2
Yeah.
and sticky noted everything and made a whole little outline for myself about what happens.
He knew more about the books. By the time we were doing part 3, he knew more about the whole saga than I did. So.
Well, hey, and I know from personal experience that Anthony's a great collaborator to work with. So I remember specifically the first time Anthony mentioned to me, like, hey, I think I'm going to work with Ryan on Hissers 3. I remember immediately saying, like, oh, I think that's a great idea. And I also knew from experience that Anthony's really great to work with. So,
Thanks, guys.
yeah, and because we've written a novel together, we're being very patient about finding a home for it.
Into television series.
Yeah, and we've spent a lot of time throwing back ideas back and forth. And one of the things that's really important in a collaborator is somebody who you can trust to get it when you've got something really good, but also will call bullshit when when you use the word tummy in a sentence.
Yeah.
Which I
Oh
did.
yeah. David used the word tummy for a grown 40-year-old man's character as the.
But my point is that I knew that Anthony would be would be a person that Ryan, that you could trust to call bullshit when he needed to help drill down on things when you're going the right direction, and that's all you can ask for in a collaborator, is somebody who can also look at things with fresh eyes. And the fact that that he went and sticky noted the book and really put thought into it, and didn't just say, like, here, I'm gonna take your draft and
Well, it wasn't a punch-up job for me.
Yeah.
It wasn't simply just, hey, revise this and make it work. It was more of like, if I'm going to take the time and get this opportunity, I want it to be worth it, and I want to put the time and effort into it. I mean, I went part-time at my job to be able to do it.
Yeah, I told Anthony, you can go wherever you want. If you want new scenes, if you want new characters, if you go for it.
There's some stuff that I fully changed that was in the original draft that I totally just took. I just said no, and
which is what in
the long run, it did take a lot of reverse engineering certain things and fixing and moving some stuff around. But some of that stuff that I did want to take out, I really did feel like was. I think I personally.
Well, it was a bad draft.
Most first.
Well, and what I think is important here, which I think people are really going to enjoy, the writers out there, is that there aren't a lot of discussions on how to collaborate, right?
Really?
There's a lot of podcasts that talk about the do's and don'ts of writing, and one of the reasons why I was excited to talk to you guys is because there's not a lot out there about, like, hey, how do you collaborate? How do you take two voices and turn them into one? How do you do those things? Anthony and I, we worked together on Nightmare City for a good 4 years, right? So we learned a lot about each other's writing styles and all that. And so, but your process in this one was a little different because, Ryan already had a draft. He already had a thing, And so
it's certainly daunting to feel like I'm coming in as the second voice, and you got to remember, like, for you and I, David, writing Nightmare City, it was its own self-contained, unique thing, right? Like, I didn't come in, I'm gonna write the sequel to Punk Rock Ghost Story, right? Like, I came in and said, I'm writing the third book, or co-writing, the third book to an already established series, and Ryan has this built-in fan base that is expecting a certain style from him,
right?
In some ways, because I've read so much of his work, has kind of made it a little bit easier for me to be like, okay, does this still work for Ryan's voice?
Absolutely.
It was also terrible, especially in all the new scenes that I wrote. I was like, does this fit? Does it seem tonally like out of place?
Well, look,
but I think, but
and Ryan hasn't heard this yet, but one of the things that I will tell both of you about my outside view of how this process worked is, and one of the things when you were starting your draft of Hissers 3, I was finishing a novel, and you and I took a retreat out to Julian, got a cabin, and we worked. You were starting this book, and I was finishing a book.
Right.
So at one point, and I think because I was finishing, I got done with the book that I was writing while you were still pulling your hair out, like, how am I going to start this? And one of the cool things was I remember having a conversation with you where I was like, all right, I've read these books. I'm going to see how ready Anthony is. And I had this conversation, and I'll admit, in a little bit of my hubris, I was like, well, let me see if I can help give Anthony some advice for taking on this project. And I remember sitting halfway through the conversation being like, oh, he's got this. He's so fucking ready for this. And
Thanks.
you know, and feeling like, oh, this is going to be really good, because that's when I discovered that you had gone back to the other books, that you had taken this as a that you weren't just sitting down and being like, I can, that you were coming at this with the proper respect for what Ryan had accomplished in the first two books. And I knew this about you, and I should have known this, but I was also brain fried from writing the longest book of my life at that point.
Yeah.
And,
well, I had to do my homework, you know, to really, like, I got to show up for Ryan, because he's not only like a favorite, you know, writer, he's also my friend, and I don't want to let him down.
yeah, and he's putting a lot of trust in you, and you did a really good job of bringing it.
And you know how many times he had to answer questions throughout the day where he's like, I don't remember. Do what you want.
do what you want.
He sent me so many. He photographed the sticky notes in the book.
Yep.
And like hundreds of photos on my phone. I'm like, I don't know. You fix it.
Yeah.
Well, Ryan, that had to be a really comforting feeling to like.
Well, no, it was because I never once was worried about could he do it or even would he do it. You know, I had no worries. It was just me saying, okay, go, man, go. You know, do what you're gonna do, and it was full trust for him to get it and do it.
Well, and I think in a lot of ways too, like, you know, you know, like you said, what we've done was original and it was different, but you and I, not only that, but the screenplays and the different things, like, so you had a process. You'd already, you know, you'd done a little bit of this before, but I'm sure there was an added weight with, like, these are already published books that you had to finish, and you brought it. So that was cool. So now, Anthony, you read the first draft and you saw what Ryan had done. How did you feel reading it, and what was your initial, like, thoughts on that?
You might want to get another drink. No,
I already knew it was not.
I mean, look, I've, you know, David, you and I always pitch drafts back and forth. Our process is one of us will write the first draft of a thing that we've outlined together and then pitch it back to the other one, right?
Right.
And I always know that a first draft is never going to be, I'm never going to get blown out of the water unless, you know, and any of Cody's first drafts, I imagine they're probably pretty good. But, you know, there was stuff where I was like, okay, I can see Ryan wanting to do this for this reason. And I don't want to get into certain spoilers yet if we're not doing that. But I did think that, you know, there's a lot of inconsistencies. There's some stuff that seems like it was one of my favorite things about reading Ryan's first drafts is the notes that go back to this later.
You do that a lot.
It says, editors don't figure this out. Who cares? You know, it's fun. But I saw what he was trying to do, and I thought, okay, how can we do this, but maybe make it more cohesive? I know what you were originally trying to do was something that was more sci-fi channel-y, right?
A little bit, yeah.
And what I wanted to do was kind of still make it like a creature feature, but I don't know, just not go down certain avenues that I thought might be a little bit well-worn. Point. David froze. Oh, he's back.
Sorry.
And it was a certain process of kind of pulling back on my own bias of what I want to see, and more of trying to attune to what Ryan's trying to do and then molding it from there. Because in the first, did you have a question, David?
So with this collaboration process with Hissers 3, so we were talking about, and we took a little break, sorry folks, but we were talking about this process of reading that first draft and noticing the difference. What do you think, Anthony, when you sat down to do this, after having reread the first two books, what did you want to bring to Hissers 3? What did you think, like, hey, I really want to see Hissers, like from an outside perspective, as somebody who didn't write the first two books, what did you want to see in Hissers 3?
I wanted to see it get a little weirder, but I also wanted to see the destruction on a grand. That's what I wanted to see.
Well, you know what's funny too, guys, because I talk about the different sensibilities, because there's a moment where you almost tee up what would have been my sequel, right? And I was like, oh yeah, they're gonna do this, and then you went a different direction, which is funny because the idea, like, because I always like mission stories about a mission. So I thought for a minute you guys were gonna write the whole book about the mission to get the snake at the zoo, right? And so I was like, oh yeah, we're gonna have this great mission, and then it happened in the first act, and then as you said, Anthony, it went way more gonzo than that, which was cool because, and anyone can look at the cover to see like things are getting way weirder. So how did you approach when you talked to Ryan, when Anthony said I want to go weirder? What was your reaction to that?
Well, I was fine with it. I think what Anthony had said earlier is so true when he was like, what about this? What about this? What about, kind of just went, yeah, do it.
He gave me such free reign that I was almost so ungovernable and drunk with power. He gave me a really good, he gave me three characters, which are they're quadruplets, technically.
The Hawk.
Yeah, the Hawk brothers.
Yeah. So he gave me the Hawk brothers, and in the original draft, they're just kind of creepy background kids.
Yeah,
and
they weren't as front and center,
right?
And then you took them and went with
yeah, because I mean those characters, you want to talk about teed up, those three characters are practically made for me to write for, basically. Right. And so I was kind of able to show more of the world in a different side of what's going on in this like Hisser apocalypse through them. And it also helped kind of draw the focus away from the main group that's been kind of the through line for all three books, just a little bit. And it gave me that opportunity to add a little bit more flavor to the book.
Right. Well, and it's funny too, because how my brain works, like I was saying, like I was thinking, oh, like this is all going to be, they're all going to be going to get the snake. But what was cool was that once they got it, and once you go to San Diego in the story, you start seeing the cracks. One of the things I like, because I love parallels and reversals, right? And so the parallels that are really going on in this narrative have to do with, as the humans are kind of cracking, the security of the military base where they're kind of hiding out is cracking at the same time. And so you really had to kind of structure that together. Was that a first draft, or was that something that kind of came later? Or am I reading too much into it?
No, I love when people discover stuff that I didn't even know I was doing. No, I think I had a lot of that in the first draft. You might have tightened up some of it later on.
I have looked at that book so many times, but the structure of it is, every scene is very intentional, because there are scenes that are, they're all where they are now, but there are some where they were 3 chapters ahead or 4 chapters back that needed to get reshuffled for everything to kind of cohesively come together. So it's all very purposefully structured.
Yeah, and I have a distinct memory, Anthony, of when we were in Julian, and there was one point where you were like staring at the laptop and you had like one eyebrow up and you were like, I'm moving shit.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? You were like, I'm moving some stuff. And then I was
Yeah.
like, because I just remember the intense look you had on your face, like something crazy was happening.
I do remember you moving things, and then me. I remember looking at it and going, "Oh yeah, oh you're right. If we, yep, okay, if we do it here, better, good." I do remember that. Yeah.
So Ryan, this is your first time. Is this the first time you've collaborated on a full book? Because I know you've probably done short stories together.
First time with Anthony, not the first time collaborating on a novel. I did write Red Ice Run with Craig Saunders.
Oh, that's right. That's right. That's
So
right.
I had a little bit of practice working. And Craig Saunders, I totally want to throw out a plug because he's such a great author. Where I kind of like learned how to work with another author. And then Anthony's the second one but we have worked on other things together. But I think this was the whole novel, right?
Right. Well, and I think what's really well, it's got to be fun for you though, Ryan, with that you've already started this work, thinking you're going to do it alone. It must be a fun moment to see like somebody else like playing with those blocks and moving them
Yeah,
around and yeah.
absolutely. Totally. Like I said, I remember him moving things and me going, "That's perfect. Like that's
Yeah.
better. That's better than what I had, and that's why I want to work with you."
Well, right. And you're a musician, so you're used to jamming
Yes.
and writing
Yep.
songs and doing all that kind of stuff. So,
And that's a great analogy. When you're working with two other musicians and my bass player in the Buzz Bombs, man, he would say, "No, no, no, do it this way," and I would go, "I don't want to," and he would say, "Do it," and then I would do it, and I go, "Ah, man, you're right, it's better." And I really got used to like trusting in people, trusting that outside objective perspective, you know, and trying to like step away from yourself from it and see what they're saying. And Anthony brought that to the table of let's move this, let's do this. And so I had a little bit of training in that already where I could go, yeah, you're right. So it's a lot better. Let's do that.
well, and that's one of the fun things about collaboration is you're gonna, no matter how much experience you have. I mean, technically on paper, um, you and I both have, more published work, but I know I learn a lot working with Anthony, and I'm sure like what's one of the things with the collaboration is we're all going to learn stuff from working with each other, and I think it's one of the things that the writers who have never collaborated with anyone else and have never had this experience are really missing out on. So in that sense, um, starting with Anthony, like what is something that you learned from Ryan and working on this particular book that you hadn't experienced before? Like, is there a moment from either the process or the actual text of the book that you feel like you got something that you didn't know before? And then I'll ask Ryan the same question.
I feel like I taught him everything. Um, but dancing. Yeah, that's true. I think one of the biggest takeaways for me from working with Ryan is ensuring that like and you would think that this would be a duh moment, but is ensuring that every scene builds on top of the back of the previous one, and that it all needs to cohesively like lead to a direction that actually matters and makes sense. Because me as a solo writer, I tend to write these weird, ambiguous, very character driven stories where there's an atmosphere and dialogue than literally anything else. Whereas writing with Ryan has really taught me how to kind of broaden my scope and work within that scope and do things on a bigger scale.
Yeah, I mean, Peter Straub is awesome, but there's sometimes where you're not compelled to keep reading because it's so goddamn ambiguous that, you know. And look, I'm saying I still really love his work, but he's an example of somebody has who is he's not going to sell as many books as Stephen King for that reason, because
Also, it might sound like another duh, but it really taught me how to write for an audience.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
because I'm not writing for people that read me or that read us or people who want a Ryan C. Thomas book. So like for me, I totally had to learn how to restructure my brain to write for a very specific audience, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and so, and for Ryan, for you, this is a story that you in a world you've already lived in. But how did working with somebody else make you see hissers differently?
Yeah, it was just a fresh perspective of it was a fresh perspective from a reader, from sort of like a viewer, if that makes sense. I kind of looked at it in the, when they do a sneak preview of a film and they hand out the questionnaire and you kind of look at like what the audience thought, and then so that was Anthony brought a lot of that to the table when he would say, well, I think this is cool and I don't think this is cool. And because I trust Anthony's perspective on things, I would say, okay, there were like, I mean, I can't think of it like a specific example, but I know there were a couple moments where I was like, I probably wouldn't do it this way, but I'm going to trust him to go with it. And then he would do it. And I'd be like, it worked,
Right.
I had to learn to like trust that this guy who knows what he's doing is going to do it.
Yeah. And a really important part of collaboration is trusting each other enough to know that sometimes you're going to be right and sometimes the other person's going to be right, and to be able to say to the partner that you're working with, like, okay, this is a battle I'm going to fight because I believe in this one, and this is a battle I'm not going to fight because I think you're right.
I don't think we had any real moments of, if I said, well, I might tweak this, or he said I might tweak this. I don't think there was any moment of like, no.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, all right, go.
I mean, are we doing spoil?
Not yet. Not yet.
Well, I guess it's not really a spoiler, but the biggest thing that when I read the first draft that I was like, I'm cutting, well, that I was the biggest thing that I was like, I'm cutting this all out and I'm fixing, not, well, I don't want to use the word fixing because it implies that was wrong. I just didn't like it. Which is, in the original draft, Doug and Olive are a couple. And I just felt that really didn't work, and it wasn't necessary. They didn't need to be a couple to be two characters who can rely and care about each other. They don't have to be romantically linked to feel that way about one another. And I feel like you already have the romance with Connor and Amanita. So for me, that was the one thing that when I wanted to talk to Ryan about cutting it, that I thought he might, push back on, but he shockingly was like, yeah, whatever.
That's how I do it.
Yeah, go for it, man. Yeah. No, and that's good because I think no one should be collaborating on a project if they feel like what they're doing is too sacred to not hear the advice of the other person. There's always going to be.
There have been times when he would say, okay, yeah, you wrote this new dialogue, but I don't like it, so I tweaked it and I did it differently. It's more fresh, it's less stale. And he was right. Like, some of the new dialogue I wrote, there was a better way to do it. He did it in a better way. I also think the big thing about collaborating is you write that first draft, but you immediately have somebody else that looks at it and goes, maybe different.
Well, it was almost like I did punch up for you.
Yeah.
Like you would write something and I'm like, there's a base here that's good. Let me punch it up a little bit. And you were fine with it and I was fine with it.
Well, and I know from going into Anthony's first drafts and working with them is that a lot of times the little things that I have to do is world building because,
yep.
It's just one of my strengths, right? And it's like one of those things of saying like, this is a little too ambiguous, dude. I know what you're trying to get at, but I think here's a way that we can really nonchalantly kind of explain it. And I think probably in a sense of it becomes a thing of when, like, and I say this in the sense of that I know I've grown to learn to know your strengths, and there will be times where I know sometimes, and I'm sure you did this with Ryan too, where you'll say, you need to work on this, or this needs a little more world building or whatever. And it's all about like learning and knowing each other's strengths and where you can work with each other. And I think that's one of the things that is lost sometimes when people are that's one of the arts of collaboration, you know.
Right.
And one of the things that's really cool about this for me as somebody who's read both of your work, there's no point in Hissers 3 where I felt like, oh, this is totally Anthony's part or this is totally Ryan's part. You guys developed a third voice, a third, thing here, and you pulled that off, and it was successful because I got to tell you, like, I was going in looking for it, you know.
I
And-
really believe that.
And that's
Yeah.
the-
Well,
that's
not
how
not because I wanted to find it, but because I couldn't not, because I know both of your writing really well. I know Anthony's writing probably a little bit better than I know than even Ryan's, and I've read Ryan's for a long time. But for me, it was like I didn't find any moments where I was like, oh, that's definitely this person and that person. And the proof is that I wrote Anthony the other day on a message and said, hey, are there any parts that you very specifically punched up? Right? Specifically because I didn't really know. And other than that, and you did mention this to me, and I knew that you kind of developed the quadruplets a lot, and you worked on the Hawk Brothers quite a bit. But that being said, it's all there. You guys did a really, really good job. Here's the thing about Hissers 3 that I'm going to say before we kind of, as a last thing before we get into spoilers and writing process. One of the things I know about Ryan is because, like, we've talked at length about the Fletch books and the simplicity of dialogue and those kinds of things. Ryan, you're very, and this comes back to, you just said this a little bit ago, your editing background for the magazine and trying to pare things down. Anthony is not a pare down writer, in the sense that as much as you are. So melding these styles and getting down to the nitty gritty of it, and finding that third voice, how was that process of this and trying to smooth things out? Like, in the end, who took the last pass is what I'm saying.
we kind of both took a last pass. I mean, when we were comfortable with what we had on manuscript, I did do that thing that I normally do with all of my books, is to, I do the Fletch mechanics basically, which is, let me go in and find every little thing that doesn't need to be there. It gets very mechanical at that point. It's like word for word for word. This sentence could lose this word. This sentence could lose this word. So I think I did that pass, and then I think maybe you did the last pass. I think he did the absolute last pass on it after that. Yeah, and that was it.
Well, your meticulous nature is why you always get last pass, Anthony.
Anthony's super meticulous. Like,
yes,
he's one of the best editors I know. Oh, really good.
Agreed. Yeah, and it's one of the reasons why we we just pumped him up. We got to break him down in some way. We got to say something.
No, it's fine. This is great. We got to talk about somebody other than Cody.
Well, all right. So let's get into let's talk a little bit about. Let's do one more pitch before we get into a short spoiler section. I will say the insanity that it breaks into towards the end and the way it ratchets up. I don't remember. Did the other two books have the timestamps down to the minute? They did. Okay, yeah.
Which, by the way, is a pain in the ass to keep track of.
Sorry.
I know. I just did one of those that I just finished. So
I'll never do it again. It was by book 2. I was like, this is
Yeah.
Yeah, keeping track of what time it is and how long things are taking. Yeah, it's painful. But so the last thing I would say before we get into spoilers, if anybody is still on the fence, Hissers 3 is it can stand alone on its own. Um, but you're definitely going to get more if you read the trilogy as a whole. And I think one of the things is this kind of third voice of the third book kind of gives it like a really fresh feel, and it's a cool thing. And um, I think the process, you can feel the fun you guys were having writing this on the page, and I think it breathed some really excellent life into this third book. So, and I probably should have said that in my review because that I think that's one of the strong selling points of it. So, anything else you guys want to say before spoilers?
Just to kind of elaborate a little bit more, I've had several people who have become my the last couple of years who didn't read Hissers 1 and 2, but they grabbed book 3. And most of the feedback I've gotten on it is that they enjoyed it even as a standalone without having read the first two. But for me, being a completist, I would need to read the first two because I know that the third book is going to be way more enjoyable.
Well, then they get a prequel, right? They get two prequels.
Yeah, that's one way to look at
Yeah,
it.
yeah, and I think that's really cool. And plus, the one thing about it standing on its own is that right now it's the book that you guys have just put out, so I'm sure you really want people to see it, and so its ability to stand on its own is kind of important. So,
It's certainly harder to market.
Yeah, that's the tough part.
yeah, yeah. Well,
Because I want to be like, read book 3, but you might want to read 1 and 2, but read 3, read 1 and 2, read 3.
Yes.
It's a
yeah.
tough
Well, we'll get the word out about that. So now, anything that okay, so we're in spoilers now. So we're gonna do short spoiler section, but for me, it's funny too because like I mentioned the whole the snake thing, but the characters who the woman, I can't remember her name off the top of my head, the doctor who was working on the cure. There's a moment where she basically says like, "Hey, this is science kind of gone wrong, and this people were intending to do well." And that's how a lot of body horror starts. Is somebody had this idea that they thought they were going to do something good, and I like that it's subtle in this book, that it doesn't take over everything, that it's just kind of a subtle moment. Can you talk, you guys, for me, that was a part that, because it honestly, I didn't remember when I was reading this, I didn't remember the Hisser's origins. So that part kind of hit me pretty hard when realizing like, oh, this happened because,
So
people
that
were
was
trying to help
was that
wounded people,
yeah, the Dr. McGowan.
Dr. McGowan, which, by the way, in the original draft, he just kills her off screen. She just dies. One of my favorite things about that original draft was getting to the end and then being like, oh, yeah, she's dead. What the?
Anyway, all right. So well, spoilers. She makes it right. Anyway, well, to get back to the subtlety of it and the understanding that they were trying to do something good. I've always been sort of a fan of, well, I guess maybe it's just how I am, where I like to look at two sides of every situation. Maybe it's the journalist in me where I try to be as objective as possible. Like, well, there's this side of the equation and there's this side of the equation. And so I think that's what she's looking at in that context is, yeah, it was supposed to be good. It ended up being, so where do you draw the line on whether or not it's good or evil? And then also with the subtlety of it is, I trust that readers will get what I'm trying to say in those situations. I think most readers do, because yeah, if you hit people over the head with it, it's kind of, it's a little obnoxious sometimes, but that's just me. That's just my character in general, is like trying to look at both sides of an argument before I sort of make a decision on it.
Okay, Ryan, this is the end of a trilogy, and you said you always wanted to have an end, that you didn't want it to go Walking Dead. Did you have the ending when you started Hissers 1? Did you gonna have the moment that you thought this was all gonna to build to, and how much did it change?
No, I think I had the ending when I started book 3. I knew Connor and Amanita's ending, and I knew I had to get them to that point. I think I was unsure with Doug and Olive and some of the other characters. But for sure, Connor and Amanita, I knew where that was going to go. At least at the start of book
3. Mm-hmm. Now, the epilogue, like the parts have different titles. Were those the titles for the different parts? Were they in the first draft, or is that a second draft thing?
All 3 books, every section change
has the title. That's right. Okay.
Yeah, it's a song title to play back into my music career here.
Oh, yeah. Are those songs you've written or songs? I'm looking at the. Oh no! I see some of the titles. Like are definitely okay. Now, Revolution Earth. What does that mean to you as far as part 6? That's the last that closes it off. Like, what does that mean?
Is that you that came up with Revolution? That was me. Well, it's just a full turn. I think I had agreed on it anyway. Full turnaround of coming to an end. We started the story here. We've come full circle. We're at the end, and that's really where I was going with that. Was that the world has completely changed. The world has done this giant turn, but it's starting over again. So it didn't just do a 180 to get opposite. It did this complete revolution to go back to where it started, and we're starting from a little bit from scratch again because half of humanity is gone.
Right. And so the idea of the other nations being like fed up and impatient and saying like, oh, we're going to nuke it from orbit to be sure. Right. The only way to be sure. That whole thing with, I love that added the kind of the ticking clock towards this part of the story. Did you have, was there ever a point where you wanted to show us what was going on in those other countries or those other things? Or
if I had, no, I didn't really want to show it. I just wanted to allude to it because, again, I didn't want this to be The Walking Dead where we're jumping all over the place with different characters and different locations and blah blah.
Right.
I wanted to stick with Connor and Amanita, Doug and Olive, but allude to the fact that, like, yeah, we've got a ticking clock now. Pretty big ticking clock, based on this perception of opportunity that our quote unquote enemies have on the other side of the globe.
Mm-hmm. What, now that we're in spoilers, what was the moment that it changed from your first draft to once it got in Anthony's hands that most made you go, oh wait, now it's I'm not sure, but now it's working, because you already said that happened a couple times for you. Is there one that you have to kind of talk about in spoilers?
I don't think it was. I don't think there's a spoiler involved in it. I think just by the time Anthony had restructured some stuff, added the scenes, punched up the Hawk brothers. I mean, more than punched up the Hawk brothers. Wrote the Hawk brothers chapters and.
I completely revised that opening chapter. It was totally different than the original draft.
I don't even think that was a chapter. You wrote the Hawk Brothers chapter.
Well, I opened with the Hawk Brothers chapter because they're going to be consistent throughout. But the original draft opens with I think a family just trying to get by, and they all get murdered by the hissers. And I thought, well, this is all well and fine, but if we're going to punch up the Hawk Brothers and make more of a character, let's open the book with them. And so that whole thing that takes place in the bowling alley / arcade, which is basically my childhood arcade bowling alley. It's a purple bowl down in El Cajon. I just felt I wanted to start like with a big opener.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it really
and so that opening chapter is totally different.
Yeah, and it sets the stakes for them.
Gives them that is that in the very beginning after they watch their brother get basically.
Oh, that's down. Right. Yeah, because I think if I remember correctly, we freeze up or we still in my original draft, I had simply mentioned that they were quadrupeds.
Right.
And then you were like, no, I'm going to show how it happens that they're not quadruplets anymore. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and it would be kind of a funny thing, I guess. Like I could see where Ryan, you were thinking it was like, well, it'd be a funny kind of throwaway line that, hey, we were quadruplets, but we're not now. And I could also see Anthony
yeah.
saying, no, 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 that's interesting. Let's drill down on it.
Anthony went, no, I want to see that.
Yeah, exactly. No, no, no,
Well,
that's
I want that. They needed more motivation, and plus, I wanted to destroy my childhood bullying.
right, right. So, so what's the moment that I think for each of you, what's the part of this book, now that we're in spoilers, starting with Anthony, like what's the part of this book that you are most proud of? Like sitting back
I
and
am
looking
most proud of this. I, I'm proud of the whole thing. I think having never worked together in this capacity, I think we did a really good job. Um, but I also think that the scene I'm most proud of is when Tucker locks the hisser in the guard shack with the Hawk brothers, and they have to kind of figure out how to get the hell out of there and unlock the door. That scene to me is putting the characters in a situation that for like a day and a half, I was like, how are they going to get the hell out of this guard shack? And so it was a process of writing action, but also trying to critically think about the scene from an outside perspective of somebody who's going to watch it and criticize how they actually get out of it. I am most proud of that scene.
Well, one of the fun things about collaborating too is that you can pat the book yourself on the back with the book a little bit more because it's not your solo work. You can be like, hey, this guy helped me a lot, so it is really good, you know, and feel more humble about doing it in the process. But Ryan, for you, what's the well for the whole trilogy, really? Because now you've got a completed trilogy. How are there moments from this book that really stand out as really strength is bringing it to a really great close that you feel really proud of?
I liked the ending, and maybe that's just because it was done.
Cool, man. Thanks. Good endorsement.
But no, I actually genuinely like the ending of where the characters end up. I mean, and all that kind of stuff. Well, it's not necessarily that. But,
we did go back and forth on whether it's going to be a happy ending. Ryan was adamant that it be a happy. So, and originally I'd wanted to kill the general.
Oh yeah, I think we did go back and
we
forth.
went back and forth on that quite a bit on a couple things. One thing was, does Doug die? The other thing is, do we kill Major General? I can't remember now. I'm old. My brain is old.
Major General Ryan.
Major General. Was, do they live?
Yeah, we went back and forth on.
And I also just want to point out, you guys, I spent way too much time researching helicopters and how you would transport a giant monster via helicopter.
I did. I got a tour of the Coronado Naval Base through a friend of a friend, and so the base in this book, by the way, this is something I am proud of. This is the part I'm proud of. Is I went to and I've played at Pendleton and I've played at Mirror-Mance, but I never really got to go inside the offices and inside the barracks and all. So I called up a friend who is a naval officer, and he said, "Oh, my buddy will give you a tour of Coronado." And I went down there, and I actually got tours through like the offices and stuff, and the firms and all that kind of stuff, and the commissaries and the shops and all that. And so I was like, I was really stoked to write about an actual sort of military base. Because I don't think a lot of people really know what a military base. You probably do, but like a lot of people don't really know what it's like, you know? So that was interesting.
Yeah, doing that kind of research is so important to tactilely feel like you can write about the world. One of the things with Ring of Fire for me was I went and, I knew I had a sports radio host as one of the main characters. So going and watching, a sports radio show get recorded one day, like, it made a huge difference.
You're welcome for the ride.
Yeah. but you know, for yeah, because it's out in the middle of nowhere. Uh,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
yeah, but for one of the things that I do think that your tour of Coronado, which I didn't know about when I read it, like really did bring a sense of realism to it. You know, because you could feel that you were picking apart parts of what you saw. You know,
Well,
yeah,
like the movie theater in the book is based on the movie theater that they have on the Coronado base. And
I saw a movie there once. It's a very funny story. I saw The Last Samurai, the Tom Cruise movie,
mhm.
and this was at the height of like kind of my anarchist organizing, and I was doing all this anti-war stuff. This was right at the beginning of the Iraq War, and I had a friend who was in the Coast Guard, and he said, "Hey, I get movies for free at the base. You should come see Last Samurai with me." And I didn't know that everyone stood up and put their hand on their hearts for the Pledge of Allegiance before a freaking Tom Cruise samurai movie, right? And so I was like, I'm not going to stand up and put my hand on my heart. And my buddy who took me was like, fucking stand up. Because we were on the
I,
base.
I,
It was a
I
very
should
funny
be
thing. So I've been in that movie theater, which is really weird.
well, that's cool. I didn't actually. I kind of peeked in. So the base in the book is an amalgam of all the bases I've been on, but the Coronado one was that really got a tour of the offices. I also got to say I had some help from there's another author, Cal Brett, who
Mm.
is a vet, and he had read the first Hissers and had sort of emailed me about a couple things I got wrong with the military. And I said, "Oh, thank you.
Mm.
Will you help me?" I come from a military family, but I myself did not serve. And I don't know why I didn't just ask my dad, who's a vet, to help. But Cal Brett, who's an author, he really helped. He sent me this list of like, well, here's how it breaks down. Here's who goes in first, and here's the vehicles they use, and here's what they're wearing, and what he really helped a lot. So I want to give a shout out to him.
Yeah, those friends who have experience can really make a difference in a book. Okay, anything else in spoilers? Like anything that you guys like scenes that you really want to talk about? Anything that um, I know for me, one of the cool aspects of it was I know for me, and I highlighted this in my review, but some of the little moments that build suspense and build those things. This book is heavy with those and little moments, and so those are kind of fun to see when you're collaborating when somebody else like writes those moments. And I think for me one of the ones was there's a scene where a character didn't want to wipe sweat away because they were afraid that they were going to miss a chance to shoot somebody. And so I'm just going to shout out that really cool moment. I don't know which one of you wrote it, but it was.
That would be Brian.
I think I know the moment you're talking about, and I think it's based on the fact that sometimes when I would gig on stage, sweat would start to go in my eye, but I'm playing, and I didn't want to stop to wipe the sweat away because it would mess up the song. So I think that's where I stole that from.
Great moment. So I just want to put that out there. Anything else for spoilers before we wrap things up?
Uh, I don't know. Spoiler wise, I mean, I don't really want to spoil it. I guess just
Well, no, we're assuming that people have read it if they're listening to this point.
Uh, um, I mean, just let us know what you think about it. My hope is that people have a good time with.
Yeah, it's a real fun book, and that's. I mean, yeah, I mean, I had a lot of fun just because I know you guys, and so like, and it's funny because like I said, I did go in like, all right, I'm gonna pick apart and see who wrote what parts, and I couldn't, so that's good. Um, but yeah, it's great fun. It's really, really, really good book.
thank you.
Yeah. At this point, if people want to find this book and your work and find you guys online, where do they go?
You can go to ryancthomas.com. You can go to grandmalpress.com, like a grand mal seizure, not grandma. Some newspaper in like Idaho interviewed me and put grandma press instead of grand mal press. So those are the two places you can, it's on Amazon and ebook, paper book right now. Audiobook is coming up. It's getting worked on, so it'll be out soon.
Nice.
I'm not cool enough for a website. So follow me on Facebook, I guess, or I'm mostly active on Instagram, Anthony_Trevino 96. That's pretty much where I'm most interactive, but add me, do whatever. I post all my very short book reviews on there and all kinds of other dumb stuff.
Yeah, you should tell us more about the movies you're watching, and I was surprised that you're the reason that I didn't go see Antlers.
Oh, you're welcome. It sucked.
Yeah, because I was fully planning to go see it because it looked great, and then I saw your 2-star review, and I was like,
it's bad, dude.
I'll wait.
Wait, you don't like the book reviews? What are you saying?
Book reviews are fine. I'm just saying, I want more. I want you to save me from more movies from time to time. Although we don't always agree, so that's.
I can save everybody from reading that most recent Malzberg book I read because it's not good. But
Well, you need to read Galaxies or Beyond Apollo because they are good.
I'll check them out.
Yeah.
But yeah,
You as a Solaris fan will like Beyond Apollo, I believe.
I'll check it out.
It's like a way hornier Solaris.
Oh, okay. Well,
Now he's in.
yeah.
It's exactly what it is. It's a hornier, more with Venus snake monsters version of Solaris. So yeah, I think you'll dig it. All right, folks. Thanks for joining us, Ryan. I overdue for having you on. I also want to plug again the Summer I Died as a really great primer for your work. Not just because it's where you began, but just because it's got that raw demo feel. And then they get to, if they read that first, they get to watch you progress as a storyteller and writer of character-driven horror, which I think you are. So I think that's a great place to start. All right, folks, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.